Well, I have a wild goat theory, pun kind of intended. I will say, Rasha, just to what you mentioned, I found their speech very anachronistic. I know, of course, like there's different accents that people are bringing in, but even the way Gwendolyn Christie spoke seems extremely anachronistic. And I know that we have like these 80s style cars and some, oddities in terms of technology and time. But the way she spoke and the other folks in that room spoke seemed about a century off the time. So I agree there. I have been thinking about these goats since season one, and I tried to put together goats, Severance, the idea of this duality, this constant theme of purging within Lumen, and then the four humors, right? The different facets of your personality that Kier Egan is insistent you have to correct or abide by. And there's one ancient text that I think in an interesting way weaves them together. So purging is a constant facet of Lumen, right? We see purging manifest in different forms. We see it with, you're cleaning the data, right, as you go through. We also see it, I think, very importantly in the break room. It's this process of atonement. So when you're punished, what you do is you purge your sins over and over and over again, and it feels very ritualistic. I think it feels very much in keeping with the idea that Kier Egan and his cult or his followers have tethers to the ancient world or ancient practices and ancient rituals. So where does purging and atonement fit in with goats? And the answer is kind of obscurely, there's a passage in Leviticus that speaks to severance, atonement, and goats. And this wasn't necessarily distinct,
Mm.
it's just one ancient religion, but I think this passage is most succinct and interesting. You had a process by which if a tribe of people, right, maybe we could imagine them as like Kier Egan's followers, were going astray or committed sins, you had two goats, right? And they were severed, they were cleaved. And there's one goat that is blessed and is allowed to live and continue on. But another has to be the recipient of a purge of sins, right? Or going astray, or maybe rebelling against the order or the norm. And that goat is then abandoned, right? It's sent off into the wilderness, metaphorically or literally. And while I don't think that we're purging sins onto goats necessarily, as we're cleaning data, and I know there's theories about, is the data correlated to people's minds or their consciousness? The idea that the goats are somehow a conduit for consciousnesses or part of consciousness that they're dispelling. I don't think it's an accident that the show has already played with a lot of ancient iconography, like Seth Milchek. Seth is also from this tradition. He's the replacement for Abel in the Cain and Abel battle and struggle of brothers, where one brother dies and Seth is a replacement. And so I think there's too many coincidences or too many tethers to ancient ideologies for this to be just a coincidence. But that was a practice where you had this duality, this animalistic duality between who's allowed to survive and continue and who has to purge. And the process of them saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, over and over again is traditionally an atonement. And that's what this goat was used for, these goats were used for, was a practice of atonement. And so I'm curious if there is some cleaving of minds, what the goats are a conduit for, what their purpose is for, physically, mechanistically, but also ideologically, in terms of Kier Egan, um, convincing his followers that they have to have a balance of humors, that they have to have a balance of personality aspects. And when they go astray, they have to rid themselves of them. And it's the only instance I can think of where goats and atonement and severance and duality and, letting of humors or self-correction all coalesce in one place in ancient traditions. So that's a very wild theory.